WTIC. We'll take more calls in a few minutes. I know I said we weren't going to have any guests, but State Senator Rob Sampson phoned in the middle of the special session in Hartford. He's going to fill us in on what's going on. So hold on if you're on hold, and call in if you want to call in, and we'll talk in a few minutes. But, Rob, thank you, sir, for joining us. Great to have you here.
It is always my pleasure, Todd. Glad to join you.
At whatever moment the bell rings or whatever, gong goes off, and you have to run, just say so, and we'll let you go.
I am watching the TV from the caucus room, and there is no one sitting in the circle of the state Senate just yet, so I think we're okay.
All right. So what's going on today? First of all, give context to people. What was supposed to happen today? Why the special session?
We were brought in to debate and vote on two pieces of legislation today. One of them is the hospital settlement agreement, and the other one is another settlement, essentially, for the restaurant industry.
That's to straighten out that mess on the tolls because of the fraudulent directive from the state, or the shaky.
Yes, the whole issue with the tip credit and the 80/20 and the Department of Labor, etc. I don't know what the bill actually says, between you and me. It just left the House of Representatives. There were several amendments offered. I think one of them passed, and I'm waiting to take a look at that legislation. They passed both bills in the House already, and in the Senate we have only done the hospital settlement agreement so far.
Well, did you have a separate piece of legislation, or were you working on the identical piece of legislation?
The plan earlier today was that the Senate would do the hospital agreement and the House would do the restaurant bill, and we would swap them.
Okay.
We finished the hospital agreement, sent it down to the House, and they have passed both pieces of legislation, and now we are about to take up the restaurant bill in the Senate.
So you guys have been going slowly.
Yeah, mostly it's a lot of hanging around, to be honest with you. And I think part of it is that as far as the restaurant bill goes, there are a couple of Democratic legislators, particularly inner city pro-union Democrats, who don't like this legislation at all, and they are doing whatever they can to obstruct it. And I think the reason why I'm waiting right now is because Senator Julie Kushner is rumored to be upset about this legislation, and she's trying to hold up the Democrats coming back into the Senate to pass it.
And why would that be? Do you know?
I think that she perceives this legislation as being beneficial to restaurants and therefore not beneficial to restaurant employees. And my understanding of the bill, and I'm trying to get clarification on this because I don't know what it says right now, is that it was going to enable the restaurants to potentially throw out the lawsuits that have been pending against them for failure to comply with the written law rather than the advice they had received from the Department of Labor.
It's such a weird thing, this attitude, that if it's good for a business like a restaurant, I mean, you're not talking about some huge corporation, you're talking about a local owner generally. And why wouldn't it be great to do things that help them grow their business and be more profitable? It's such a difficult business to be in to begin with.
Right. Well, I got to tell you, it's going to be a difficult vote for me anyway.
Why is that?
Because, and I'll tell you, both votes today, extremely hard for me. Because both of them put me in a position of doing something I don't want to do by situations that were created by others. In the case of the restaurant bill, in order to vote for it and potentially save these restaurants from having these massive destructive lawsuits, I've got to actually put into Connecticut law regulations I don't agree with, which is what the Department of Labor has been advising them. You know, Todd, as well as I do, that I'm a genuine free market capitalist. I do not believe that the government has any business interfering with the private contractual negotiation between an employer and employee.
Correct.
So I don't want to. This problem was not created by me. I don't want to see it, encoded into the law. But nonetheless, I'm going to be left with a choice where I can vote yes to stop these lawsuits, or I can vote no and potentially allow these businesses to be damaged by that same exact legislation I don't like.
Yeah, I love it. It shows how complex these issues are, where even when you operate by clear principles, as you do, small government liberty-oriented guy that you are, which makes you so wonderful, that it puts you sometimes you can get in a difficult situation. I love that you're sharing that with us.
Yeah, and the hospital bill is the same exact thing, Todd.
All right, hang on. Fill us in a sec, because we've got to get traffic and weather together on the 8th. We'll be right back to you. Things still clear on the TV screen there?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, good. All right, we'll continue with State Senator Rob Sampson in just a moment as he sits waiting for the special session to resume. Yep, special session. State Senator Rob Sampson from Wolcott is there, and he's reporting to us on the dilemmas in the legislation. So before you go off onto the hospital bill, just tell us what is the outcome that either way makes you uncomfortable as a liberty-oriented guy?
On which bill?
On the restaurant bill.
On the restaurant bill, if I vote in the affirmative, I am possibly saving the restaurants in our state from what I think is an illegitimate lawsuit that is very damaging and may put some good people out of business. If I vote no, the problem with that, however, though, is that I would have to vote to put into our state laws the regulation that they have been operating under, that they've been advised by the Department of Labor, which is essentially a regulation similar to the minimum wage about how they have to treat employees that both wait tables and do other work.
Okay, which is ridiculous, the way they micromanage something that's none of the state's business.
And the expectations are absurd. That you want to track every minute of how an employee is operating in a restaurant.
Yeah, for
situation.
people who aren't familiar, you get a lower minimum wage as a restaurant worker, but the regulation is that if you're not actually doing side work or other work that's assigned to a server, is that when then you get kicked up to a regular minimum wage? Is that how it works?
Yes, more or less.
Okay.
And the thing is that it's virtually impossible for a restaurant to be able to track
properly track it.
And imagine on a Saturday night, when there's chaos in a restaurant.
And for 5 minutes, you're shining silverware, and you're supposed to get paid a different. Yeah, it's totally stupid, and shows how stupid the legislators are who write this stuff. It's craziness. Okay, so the other side, the other legislation. Tell us about that.
Well, so the hospital bill is a very similar situation. Back in 2011, shortly after I was first elected, and so was Governor Malloy, he came up with a scheme, for lack of a better term, that he was essentially going to apply a tax on hospitals, but the hospitals would ultimately benefit. At least this is what he sold them for the purpose of passing this legislation, because they would then be eligible for additional federal grants from the federal government because of the taxes they're paying to Connecticut. So ultimately, the plan was, we're going to put this hospital tax in, and the feds are going to give the hospitals more money, and they're going to give the state of Connecticut more money. We all win, and it's a beautiful thing.
It was like, let's figure out how to scam this ridiculous thing called big government into giving us money we don't deserve.
Right. And a terrible, terrible policy. It's not. I just got through speaking on the floor of the House. I called it, or the floor of the Senate, rather, and I called it a scam also, and pointed out that that's not what my constituents sent me here to do, to not come up with some scam or rigged system to find a way to finagle the taxpayers' money. And that's exactly what it is. But now here it is. It's 2019. So over the last 8 years, Governor Malloy failed to live up to his end of the bargain with the hospitals, and he shorted them money every year. So they sued the state of Connecticut, and we were getting very close to a potential settlement where these hospitals might have won, and the state of Connecticut might have been forced to award them $4 billion.
Wow.
And that brought everyone to the table.
Suddenly everybody woke up, huh?
Yes. Everybody came to the table, and they put together this negotiated settlement agreement that was before the House and Senate today.
And what does that consist of?
What it does really is it requires the state of Connecticut to pay a certain amount each year over the next 7 years, totaling $872 million, which is less than we would have had to pay under the original agreement, versus potentially losing a lawsuit and putting a much larger burden on the taxpayers. So here I am. I didn't vote for this scam. I don't like this scam, but I have two choices. I either vote yes and mitigate the damage, or I vote no and potentially put my constituents on the hook for much more.
And what's wrong with voting yes?
Well, voting yes is that I am perpetuating this scheme, and
you become an accomplice to the grotesque scheme of Dan Malloy that has failed for 8 years to do the right thing.
Yeah, picking up after someone else's mess that I did not create, that I objected to begin with. Not only that, this agreement also puts a bunch of stipulations in it that prevent future legislatures from doing things.
You can't do that.
Yeah, you cannot. And I don't think this agreement will live up to the chart of projections that have been made for any more than the first one did.
All right. So, Rob, thank you for filling us in. That's terrific. Now we know what an agonizing thing it is to walk into that building to go to work.
I'm telling you.
Thank you, sir.
It's my pleasure. Have a great afternoon.
All right. State Senator Rob Sampson from Wolcott joining us to fill us in on the special session going on right now, and which will continue to go on for quite some time, it sounds like.